Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we live in one of the most beautiful, ecologically diverse places on the planet. From the Red Centre to the Tiwi Islands, from our vast ancient escarpments to our pristine waterways, we are incredibly fortunate to be surrounded by such natural and unique beauty. We know how much Territorians value our environment. It underpins our lifestyle. It plays a huge role in driving our economy through tourism, and it's an immeasurable cultural significance to Aboriginal people. Madam Speaker, we spoke earlier about the Territory economy and the work that has been done over many years to improve that vision for the Territory. Madam Speaker, we are talking about the environment because we know that we need to look after the environment for future generations. That was a strong focus, Madam Speaker, for us when we were in government, and it remains a key pillar of the Territory Labor opposition. It's why we are incredibly concerned about the CLP government's efforts to sneak in their dodgy Territory Controller Bill for Territorians. This is a lot to say about the government's record of being transparent and accountable. You don't try and sneak in a bill and elect an unelected official to take on that role unless you are trying to hide something. And it isn't hard, Madam Speaker, to see what they are trying to hide from Territorians with the Territory Controller proposal. Massive overreach that will put an unelected bureaucrat and the Chief Minister effectively above the law, so they can bulldoze through new developments while sidestepping legislative and regulatory safeguards in the system, including environmental and cultural heritage safeguards. They've already had the time to water down their original proposal and put it out to consultation because they got well and truly caught out on this. Pretty shameful attempt at deceiving voters merely months after the election, Madam Speaker. I know the differences of opinions in the community about the environmental reforms Labor brought in while in government. Some people will say they went too far, others will say they didn't go far enough. But what I do know is that it made significant advancements in our legislative and regulatory frameworks to ensure our natural assets are better protected now and into the future. As we move through our reform agenda, we always sought to consult the community and ensure all voices were heard before making decisions on significant reforms. That's particularly in the case of environmental reforms. We also, Madam Speaker, ensured that our reforms were guided by data and research from scientists and professionals who knew more about the environmental impact than anyone in this chamber. I know members opposite will have a difficult time with the data and the evidence. They don't really know whether they believe in the data or not. Madam Speaker, it is incredibly important in this time to reflect on how important data and evidence is. I want to raise the concern that was brought up yesterday by the member for Port Darwin with her excuse for delaying domestic and family violence funding is that she wants to do an audit and collect evidence about the effectiveness of the program. And then next minute, she's saying that data and evidence can be manipulated to support any argument. Seriously, government, you need to make up your minds. We have been in doubt that the policy reform should be underpinned by strong evidence and informed by people with expertise and knowledge in those policy areas. Yes, Madam Speaker, we are out and proud in love with experts and evidence. That includes the experts of the Department of Environment. The CLP seem to love denigrating people with expertise in particular fields. They would do well to remember that there are many public servants in the Northern Territory government who have built knowledge and expertise in their respective fields over many years and decades, so they can ensure that government policy is informed and evidence-based. When the CLP denigrates experts, they are effectively denigrating hard-working, highly capable, highly knowledgeable public servants. Territory Labor on the other hand, has the utmost respect for the work of our public servants in agencies like the Department of Environment, who should be very proud of the work they did in overhauling a number of the Territory's environmental regimes. Madam Speaker, as I said earlier, in government we included Territorians in that conversation about strengthening environmental protocols. We know that Territorians had lost faith in the former CLP government over environmental matters because they had to watch on in dismay while they handed out water licences to their mates and pushed through projects without proper environmental assessment processes in place. The then Environmental Assessment Act was 6 pages long, Madam Speaker. That's it, 6 pages. And it hadn't been amended since 1982. The CLP's efforts were so far removed from the community expectation around environmental protection that things had to change, and they had to change urgently. I acknowledge my former colleagues, the Minister for the Environment, the former member for Casuarina, who, when we came to government, immediately set out modernising the Environmental Protection Act. We opened up the process to extensive community and stakeholder consultation. It was a transparent process that ensured everyone had a chance to have their say at multiple steps along the way, including in the development of new legislation and then through the process of developing accompanying regulations. What came out of that process, Madam Speaker, was a contemporary piece of legislation governing environmental impact assessments and approvals, the Environmental Protection Act 2019, which finally brought the Territory into line with other states and territories. It had a number of objectives: to promote ecologically sustainable development so that the well-being of the people of the Northern Territory is maintained or improved without adverse impact on the environment; to recognise the role of the environmental impact assessment and approvals in promoting the protection and management of the environment; to provide for broad community involvement during the process of environmental approval, and to recognise the role that Aboriginal people have as stewards of their country and the importance of participation by Aboriginal people and communities in environmental decision-making. This represented a massive step forward for the Territory in terms of environmental protections. Similarly, we upheld our pre-election commitment to place a moratorium on onshore gas exploration until a full scientific inquiry was undertaken, alongside extensive community consultation. The inquiry resulted in 135 recommendations, which the Territory Labor government agreed to implement in full. Madam Speaker, this included significant amendments to multiple pieces of legislation, including the Petroleum Act, the Water Act, and the Environmental Protection Act. This framework ensures that the operations and regulations of onshore gas were robust and transparent. Madam Speaker, the CLP continue to talk the Territory down. It appears that the reason they are only so relentlessly negative is because they don't actually have an economic plan beyond riding off Labor's coattails and claiming credit for projects that got underway by the former Labor government that were going through the rigorous and required and supported environmental protections. Equally, it is becoming increasingly clear that they have no plan for safeguarding the environment. In fact, their sneaky Territory coordinator suggests that they actually intend to water down environmental protections alongside cultural and heritage provisions, to name a few. Madam Speaker, as well as the environmental reform work while in government, we also took a number of significant steps to better protect our coasts and waterways, recognising how central they are to our Territory lifestyle, to our cultural, social and economic life. With a coastline extending nearly 11,000 kilometres, including 887 islands and more than 72,000 square kilometres of coastal waters, it is an incredibly unique part of our environment. We implemented the first ever Northern Territory Coast and Marine Management Strategy to support the use of coast and marine areas by Territorians and visitors, for recreation and cultural purposes, to manage the growing demand for natural resources, and to foster sustainable industry for the benefit of the economy and to protect the environment. Developed in close consultation, Madam Speaker, with landowners, community and industry partners, the strategy sets a 10-year direction for the management of coastal and marine environments in the Northern Territory up until 2029. At the time of the launch of the strategy, senior Larrakia man Richard Fijo said, "Our people, the saltwater people, have been managing the coastal waterways and the coastal margins for thousands of years. And now we can look forward to the support of stakeholders in continuing that work for the benefit of future generations." While in government, we delivered another critical commitment to better protect our marine and coastal environment with the declaration of the Lemon Bight Marine Park Management Plan. The Lemon Bight is an incredibly rich area in marine life, including seagrass beds, dugong and sea turtles, and endangered sawfish. It also supports exceptional recreational fishing and valuable seafood industries. The plan provides a framework for the ongoing management of the marine park using best practice monitoring and evaluation. In government, Madam Speaker, we also took the critical step of permanently banning seabed mining in the Northern Territory's coastal waters after extensive consultation with the community. The vast majority of Territorians told us they didn't want seabed mining because of the potential risks to our coasts and our marine environment. At that time, the then Territory Labor government said seabed mining, subsea mining, couldn't be accurately assessed and regulated in a manner consistent with the Environmental Protection Act 2019 due to the risks and uncertainty it posed. Madam Speaker, it is extremely concerning to imagine what would occur under the CLP government without that level of protection or environmental benchmark in place, particularly when you consider how much they are hoping to interfere with good governance through the Territory Coordinator Bill. Madam Speaker, I want to turn to the critical issue of climate change. Climate change is real. Climate change, unfortunately, is not going away because of the lack of investment we are seeing globally. It is disappointing, Madam Speaker, that the CLP government no longer have a Minister for Climate Change. I know those opposite will hate me talking about science or hate me talking about climate change, but it is clear our climate is changing. We see more frequent and more severe weather events impacting our communities, particularly our remote communities. Our job here in this House is to work to minimise the risks of climate change across our communities, our environment, our economy, our territory. We need to take big steps. We need to take smart climate action. We need to focus on a low-cost clean energy opportunity, creating jobs for Territorians and protecting our natural assets. In government, we established the Office of Climate Change and the Office of Sustainable Energy to oversee and implement our climate change response, including our net zero emissions by 2050 target and our 50% renewable energy by 2030 target. It is critical that the CLP continues on those initiatives to ensure that we reach our targets. It is hard to have faith that they are taking climate change seriously, Madam Speaker. Prior to the election, they had a shadow minister dedicated to climate change in the member for Braitling. They then pulled a classic bait and switch, scrapping the climate change portfolio as soon as they came to government, just as they scrapped any requirement to consider basic human rights in legislation. It's another sneaky move from a government that clearly isn't serious about tackling this issue, despite the significant impact it will have on future generations of Territorians. Many of those sitting across from me today in government have children, grandchildren, even great-grandchildren. They should ask their young family members, what are they most worried about when it comes to their future? And I guarantee most of them will say climate change. You should get onto it. Like domestic violence, it is one of the most pressing issues facing the Northern Territory. You can start by rethinking your Territory Coordinator Bill that gives an unelected bureaucrat and the Chief Minister free rein to discard all environmental, legislative and regulatory safeguards. Ignore the advice of data and scientists and experts. Ignore the advice of departments and their CEOs, and disrespect the decisions and judgment of the CLP's own ministers. We absolutely support, where appropriate, streamlined processes, but they can't come at the cost of good governance and the environment. A regime where the Chief Minister will apparently just give the Territory Coordinator a wink so he can rubber stamp projects regardless of the outcomes, regardless of the environment, regardless of cultural heritage, regardless of independent assessments. Talk about pet projects. You know you are having a bit of a, you have to have a bit of a think about it when you are winking at someone to get something done. You have to feel sorry for the person who gets the unelected role of the Territory Coordinator, because the CLP knows that the corners and red tape they want to cut could have major negative consequences for the Territory. Then they want to be able to wash their hands of those decisions when the public finds out just how sharply they cut those corners, Madam Speaker. I encourage the CLP government to commit to the former Labor government's climate change response towards 2050 plan. We have done the work for you. You are welcome to claim it as your own, just as long as you honour it and all of the other reforms the former Territory Labor put in place for the long-term protection of our beautiful environment. If it's the CLP government that are serious about maintaining the great Territory lifestyle, then they need to ensure that our environmental protection reforms are honoured. These measures were put in place not to hinder progress or cater to a minority. They were implemented to ensure environmental protection, preservation and accountability in decision-making. Yes, let's develop the Territory's natural resources, but let's not cut corners. Isn't that right, Member for Nelson? Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's clear that Territorians care deeply about the environment, and the CLP needs to be upfront about any plans that they have to water down our safeguards, as they result in many years of consultation and strong collective efforts. When we talk about the environment, Mr. Deputy Speaker, every single member of this Parliament in our electorates can see firsthand the abundance of beauty the Territory has, the uniqueness of the Territory's lifestyle, the unique ecosystems that exist only in parts of the Northern Territory. The Territory is home to some of the most unique ecosystems in the world. There are extremely important areas in the Northern Territory that should be preserved for generations, but should be preserved to hold the importance of those unique ecosystems that don't exist anywhere else. Anywhere else in the world, they exist only in the Northern Territory. That is what we are talking about. We need to back in those important ecosystems. We need to back in the important environmental reform. When we talk about the need to be doing this work, it's actually for all of us. It's for our kids, our grandkids, our nieces, our nephews, our friends, our families, for our constituents to have a brighter future, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because there are no jobs on a dead planet. Because if the planet is dead, if the ecosystems are eroded, if the weather continues to increase, we will see people doing it even harder than they are now. Now, here in the Northern Territory, if we continue to ignore climate change and not invest in it, we will see climate refugees. Those refugees will be vulnerable people living in remote locations who will have no option other than to leave their remote community and come to a larger regional town or city in the Northern Territory to seek support. Because the climate is getting hotter, our water resources are getting scarce. We need to do the work to understand. We need that comprehensive, independent evaluation done to understand the water resources, to reform this space, Mr. Speaker, because it is absolutely incredibly important. We need to look at how we can adapt to and mitigate areas of the climate that are changing. We need to continue to roll out those important renewable energy targets and those investments, because it is absolutely important. Now, I had the opportunity to be out the front of Parliament House yesterday. I stood tall, I stand proud with a number of Territorians who were there in opposition to the CLP's Territory Coordinator Bill, because what they were raising alarm out there is not a single person qualified in the Northern Territory to sit in that job and make decisions at any given time on everything, all things territory. It's physically impossible that you have one person who is expected to know everything about everything in the territory and make a decision. That's why decisions should be being made by a cabinet who can come together, who can talk about things, who can bring legislation to Parliament for debate, can send off to have public consultation and feedback, but that is all being eroded in the Territory Coordinator proposal, where simply dropping in someone to do the job, a former INPEX employee, to do the job of what should be Cabinet and the Chief Minister. The CLP Cabinet full well willingly giving away all decision-making and power to an unelected, undemocratically created position is absolutely disgraceful. The people of the Northern Territory did not elect a Territory Coordinator. The people of the Territory will make this known. If I was a number of members in the CLP, I would be shaken in my boots in the electorates that are going to punish you for this decision. If I was the member for Breitling, I would be shaken because that seat will go to the Greens at the next election because of your mismanagement of the environment. I would be shaken because that's what's going to happen. You are going to cause your own fall, because bringing in a person who's not elected, just appointed by a bunch of CLPers who we know the last time they were in government, how much money can you put in Foundation 51 and then we'll give you a water licence for $1. That's what you got under the CLP. That's what it looks like you're getting again. Here you go, mate, do a job for me and I'll push her through. I'll give the Territory Coordinator a wink and we'll get your proposal through. That's what's happening. That's what's being talked about today. That's what was being talked about outside, and did a single member from the CLP have the guts, the courage to go out there and talk to Territorians? Did you talk to Territorians? No. You didn't talk to Territorians.
Deputy Chief Minister, stop interjecting.
We're hearing in here the interjections saying this and that about the bill. Well, you had an opportunity yesterday to go out there and actually communicate with the community about what is in your bill. Encourage people to have those conversations, but you all not willing to do that. And we're saying again, I find it hilarious that the member for Fong Lim, former Labor Party member, who will never be a minister under the CLP because they don't trust him, is talking about grandstanding when he gets up here and grandstands all the time about statistics and figures that are wrong, that he's picking and choosing. It's CLP. It's CLP.
Sorry,
It's
point of order.
CLP.
Member for Fong Lim, take a seat.
Deputy Speaker, Standing Order 26, that's a personal misrepresentation. I can't be maligned for what I've said as being incorrect unless the member is willing to point to something specific.
My time, can you please
Just
stop
take
my
a seat,
time?
please.
I asked that the member withdraw the statement.
Yeah,
because I
point of
asked
order
that the
at
member
this
withdraw the
stage. I
statement.
think the member's still just having a conversation.
Well, let him have a factual one.
As I said, the member for Fong Lim is a bit like the other members of the CLP government. They pick and choose what information they put out in the public domain. They pick and choose. It's his government that have come out and said
Deputy Chief
the
Minister,
great
please.
thing about evidence, evaluation, accountability and monitoring and research is you can pick and choose what you want. That's your government, member for Fong Lim, not mine. That's the government that you're a part of that says we'll pick and choose what evidence, what research and what evaluations say, and we'll make them say whatever we want. I'm not saying that. That's what your government is saying. That's what your government is saying.
Member for Gwadja.
Not me.
Member for Gwadja, please direct your question,
Through the chair. I'm not saying that. That is the member for Fong Lim's own team is saying that they will pick and choose the evidence, the data. Not me. That's what his own cabinet minister of the CLP government is saying. We are absolutely doing the hard work. We will continue to hold the government account to the Territory Coordinator Bill because it is important. While we are in opposition, we will hold you to account. We will begin our own process of going out, talking with the community, building good policy to take to the next election, reflective of what the community wants, reflective of what the community needs, because it's important to do that work. Oh, the member for Fanny Bay pops up. The member who, again, chooses what she chooses to tell her own constituents. She doesn't tell them that she wants kids in spit hoods. She doesn't tell them that she wants to put
Deputy
kids
Chief Minister,
under 12 into prison. And I bet you she goes out and doesn't talk about the Territory Controller overriding all environmental protection. So we're going to work with the community. We're going to work with the environment sector in this great territory to make sure that we get out to Fanny Bay and we tell them that the member for Fanny Bay is actually supporting a bill that erodes environmental protections, because it's probably going to be the urban seats that are hit the hardest when it comes to erosion of environmental protections, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So this is important. We're going to do our job going out, talking to people about what's going on in here, and certainly the environment, the environmental groups, the environmental sector who do a fantastic job in the community. They are going to be out talking to Territorians, making sure that Territorians know that the CLP government...
Deputy Chief Minister, can you please stop interjecting? Member for Gwadja.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The member for Nelson, the Deputy Chief Minister, continues to object because the truth hurts. And he knows that this is a bad bill. He knows that Territorians love the environment. He knows...
Sorry, point of order. Member
about interjecting, and he continues to do so.
I haven't warned him. I just asked
warned him
to
before.
cease, like I've told many other members. But I do ask the Deputy Chief Minister to please restrain himself. Member for Gwadja.
Another point of order, just seeking an extension of time.
Are you talking on this? Okay.
Is extension of time? No?
I
I think the noes have it. Good try.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But we know the environmental community is going to be out there doing the hard work.
Was time granted? I thought it was no. The answer was no. Okay.
Point of clarification.
Point of order, Deputy Mr Speaker. The member's time has expired.
Sorry, they were still dealing with the matter
Yeah,
at hand.
I take your point. I was asking Deputy Chief Minister.
The ayes had called it. So if there isn't, we'll call it division.
It's okay. I get the advice that people are happy for you to proceed. Start again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for that good leadership right there. Mr Deputy Speaker, again, it's just really important to highlight the importance of the environment, and everything that we do has a consequence in the environmental space. Every major project is important, but it can't come at the cost of the environment. Because as I've said, there are no jobs on a dead planet. We need to make sure that we are being environmentally responsible in everything that we do. Certainly, all of these major projects are often very welcomed because they bring economic opportunity, but that cannot come at the cost of the environment for future generations. I want to just really highlight that there are some great initiatives that are being rolled out across the Northern Territory. The former Territory Labor government brought in a ban, and we declared bufflegrass a weed. We've had the gamba grass work happening. We also, Mr Deputy Speaker, need to talk about the importance of sacred sites. And I want to acknowledge that the Territory Coordinator Bill says that process is exempt from that. But I also want to acknowledge the CLP did do good things there.
Sorry, point of order. Member Gorda.
Point of order, Standing Order 35, relevance to subject. I thought we were here to debate the environmental protections, not a Territory Coordinator Bill, which is not before this Parliament.
Thank you.
I'll let the member for Quadra continue.
Thank you. It is quite relevant given that the Territory Coordinator in your own discussion paper will be making decisions about the environment and about environmental reform. So it is important that I hope members of the backbench of the government have read the consultation paper and the proposal. So again, let's talk about this. Now, I acknowledge that the government have said that Aboriginal sacred sites and the process that needs to be adhered to there is exempt. The Territory Coordinator is exempt from reaching in there. But what's not clear is that Aboriginal cultural sites that are heritage are not exempt. And heritage itself is not exempt. That is of great concern to Territorians, and that is something that we need to get further clarification from the CLP government on. Furthermore, the CLP's Territory Coordinator Bill has no jurisdiction when it comes to Commonwealth legislation. So make the point that when we're talking about legislation that involves the Commonwealth, whether that's part of the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, whether that's doing projects on Aboriginal land, Territory Coordinator has no jurisdiction because it is Commonwealth, it's irrelevant. But again, it is very alarming that the CLP government have completely removed climate change. You're hearing people in departments saying they're not even allowed to talk about climate change around the government ministers. Climate change is real. You cannot continue to ignore it. We see it every year with unprecedented rain and floods becoming more frequent. You only have to look at the last 15 years of weather to notice the patterns are changing. It is becoming far hotter in parts of regional and remote Australia, and it is becoming more and more frequently wet during the wet season in isolated areas, and the severity and the intensity of those storms is increasing. So this is work that we all do need to do as a parliament and work with the government on addressing and responding to climate change. The other area is really needing to talk about is land clearing, because that is happening across the Northern Territory at an unprecedented rate, and it is illegal. And we need to be doing more work in this space to be holding people who clear that land accountable, and that there are consequences for unapproved land clearing in the Northern Territory. And I want to make the point that there are many people out there who often cast in a negative light sacred sites. Well, sacred site clearances are so important because there are parcels of land that Aboriginal Territorians have been locked out from, and until there isn't an application to do a development or a project on that land, that is often sometimes the first time in generations that Aboriginal people are allowed to get access back onto country to see and pay respect and make sure that those sacred sites haven't been denigrated or desecrated and that they have been protected. So I think we need to ensure that there's lots of work. Now, the former Labor government had done a comprehensive suite of proposed reforms to the Aboriginal Sacred Sites Act. Unfortunately, due to the parliamentary schedule and the August elections, they were never able to be introduced. That's certainly something that the government should look at, is that protection and the contemporisation of the Northern Territory Sacred Sites Act. It is actually the strongest sacred sites legislation in the country, but even then it could be contemporised and improved. So that is something to certainly think about. I want to also acknowledge all of the amazing environmental groups across the Northern Territory. I want to give a shout out to the Arid Lands Environment Centre, the Environment Centre Northern Territory, the Environmental Defenders Office, certainly doing fantastic work across the Territory and working with people to make sure that we continue to invest in this space, we raise awareness in this space, and we continue to shine a light on this space because it is incredibly important. But it's not just about that area, it's also about making sure that we continue to deliver infrastructure. And I want to acknowledge in the member for Barclay's electorate, there's a group of community members working with Simon Quilty around remote housing and making sure that remote housing is in fact progressing towards a space where it is built for the changing environment, those hotter climates, that there are different ways of innovating in construction of those homes. And it was heartening to acknowledge the Commonwealth government recently, before the election, renegotiating that remote housing package to allow remote Territorians involvement in the design of the homes to make sure that they are fit for purpose and they're taking into account the changing environment. Certainly want to acknowledge, not wanting to preempt the debate for next year in the general business motion, but certainly looking forward to having the conversation around water allocation, looking at what water is available in the Northern Territory, what water is underground, actually honouring the commitment of allocating water to the strategic Indigenous water reserves is incredibly important. Water is an issue that touches on every Territorian's life. Remote Aboriginal people, urban people, our hardworking pastoralists, our farmers, everyone in the Territory has a unique connection to water. Water is the lifeblood for every one of us in the Territory. We need to do more in water. I certainly acknowledge that Territory Labor will be going back out and talking with the community on our future policy settings into the new year, and certainly making sure that we listen, that we learn, and that we come back with a good position in the following years around this important issue of the environment and around water. I look forward to the future contributions into this debate, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I think it's incredibly important. It's an issue that affects each and every one of us. So thank you.
Thank you, Member for Quadra. Member for Dartmouth.
Thank you, Mr
Deputy Speaker, and I'll apologise in advance because I do have Madam Speaker on my speaking notes, so if I do call you that, I do apologise, but I'll try and keep it to Mr Deputy Speaker. And
I'm very tolerant.
thank you, yeah. I could get a warning, so yeah. But anyway, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to firstly thank the member for Guadja for bringing this important motion to the floor of the Assembly today, this very important motion on the environment. And I will just pick up from the Environment Minister around have your say process around the Territory Coordinator, just to trigger everyone's memory. So what had happened was that the Territory Coordinator paper was out to certain stakeholder groups for consultation. It wasn't made public at that time. It was only because our government had been given that paper and we tabled it in Parliament at question time that it became public. So we saw that at question time in the October sittings.
Can we let the member for Daly speak, please?
So I find it quite astonishing that the Environment Minister comes in here and tries to bluff it out to say, oh no, it is on Have Your Say now. But it was only because of our government that had tabled that paper to make it public. So I just remind those opposite that we were the ones that made it public. We were the ones that ensured that Territorians had their say on this piece of paper. Sorry? And here we go. The member for Barclay continues on because he doesn't like the truth to get in the way. But we do know that the Territory Coordinator paper was tabled by our Leader of Opposition, and that it was made public. So just to get that on the record. And the member for Fenny Bay, I'd like to hear from your constituents whether they agree with this as well, because I've been speaking to many people across the Territory and I know they're very concerned about this piece of legislation. Thank you. So firstly, Mr Speaker, it is not lost on this Assembly that the Northern Territory is home to some of the most breathtaking and unique landscapes in the world. It is a place of great physical beauty, from the vast Central Desert region, home to the heart of Australia, Uluru, to rugged beauty of Kakadu and Litchfield National Parks, to the expansive wetlands and Litchfield National Parks, to the broad beaches of Arnhem Land. These places craft natural environments which hold stories of ancient history and unparalleled biodiversity. These landscapes aren't just natural wonders, Mr Deputy Speaker. They are also cultural and sacred treasures. For over 60,000 years, they have sustained and inspired Aboriginal people, whose knowledge of their country is a legacy which we must preserve and ensure is respected. I'm fortunate, as my electorate of Daly is a treasure of natural beauty, with a rich cultural history and an incredible tourism opportunities for locals and visitors alike to explore. We have the incredible waters of the Daly River, renowned, particularly in this Assembly, by one minister for its world-class barramundi fishing spots, and the serene beauty of the Butterfly Gorge, just to name a few. But Mr Deputy Speaker, as we know, our magnificent environment faces unprecedented challenges. Climate change is driving rising temperatures and unprecedented weather patterns, threatening ecosystems and ways of life in urban, rural, remote areas across the Territory. Bushfires, invasive species of both flora and fauna, and habitat destruction are putting pressure on our wildlife and our Territory lifestyle. Our coastline, spanning from the Arafura Sea to the Gulf of Carpentaria, faces threats from marine populations seeing ghost netting and a variety of plastics coming ashore every day. Our wetlands and rivers, vital lifestyles in dry regions, are at risk from water mismanagement and rampant unchecked industry development if we do not conduct our due diligence. Mr Deputy Speaker, that is why we think it is important that we bring this motion before the floor on the Assembly here today. We currently have a CLP government who is clear that its aim is unashamedly to put unprecedented amount of centralised power into the hands of an unelected individual, who it seems will have more power than members of the Chief Minister's own cabinet, whose abilities are clearly being called into question. Why is it, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the Chief Minister and her team believes that environmental laws or public consultation should be dashed for political gain, especially when it comes to the impact of major projects could have on our environment? We said, Mr Deputy Speaker, we said loud and clear in this Assembly, the CLP's track record on the environment speaks for itself. It is not just their words, it will be their actions. By implementing this Territory Coordinator position in its current form, the CLP is declaring itself a party that will put the environment last. That this is a party that will put the interests of Territorians now and the future generations last.
Put the Barclay last.
The CLP said that it would cut regulatory timelines by 50%. How will it do that? Well, we don't know, Mr Deputy Speaker. By cutting our time for the proper and truly considered environmental assessments and by reducing and removing environmental protections where they can. It is now clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the only way to reduce the timeframes is to remove consultation process and deny Territorians their right to have a say on applications that will impact the environment and the broader territory. Territorians are now waking up to the CLP's power grab, and they have a bit to say about it. As I stated earlier, I've been out speaking to many of my constituents over the last few weeks between the last sittings and this sittings, and it's amazing how many people are bringing it up, from teachers to Aboriginal corporations to when I've been out door knocking around Bachelor down to Pine Creek. They are very concerned about this particular draft bill that's coming before the House. They understand the implications of what this draft bill means and the power grab that the CLP are bringing to the table here today, and it's quite concerning for a lot of people. On this side of the Assembly, we bring in the evidence, the science, and above all, informed decision-making and listening to the expectations of the community and their views to ensure that we got the balance of environmental protections and conservation right and development. Mr Deputy Speaker, the former Territory Labor government understood that the natural environment is one of our greatest assets and that we must protect it for the benefit of all current and future generations. In this Assembly, we talk a lot about how tourism is a vital part of the Territory economy and how it is a critical job-creating sector delivering significant financial and lifestyle benefits to our regions and city. But we should probably ask ourselves again, why do people visit the Territory? It is not just to get a glimpse into our unique lifestyle, it is the opportunity for visitors to explore and experience our beautiful outback environment. That is why the former Territory Labor government was passionate about and consistently backed the tourism industry. Working with the sector, the former Territory Labor government invested strongly in marketing strategies to bring more tourism here, supported infrastructure development and introduced initiatives that would guarantee them a wonderful experience. But we also knew that a wonderful experience means investing in tourism, which is sustainable and protects our Territory environment. In 2022, Tourism NT released the Sustainable Tourism Action Plan. This is a plan which recognises that the environment, biodiversity and living cultural values are closely connected with our tourism. It is crucial that the government and industry work together to protect and restore the natural environment while sharing our unique and stunning backyard with visitors from Australia and around the world, Mr Deputy Speaker. This means that we can have a tourism industry which can continue to strive for economic resilience and enrich our diverse local communities while maintaining a balanced environment. To build on this, the former Territory Labor government was also provided Sustainability for Tourism Industry grants, which saw 11 tourism businesses, 7 in the top end and 4 in Central Australia, receive funding for projects to help reduce their ecological and carbon footprint and positively impact the Territory's natural and cultural environment. Mr Deputy Speaker, this CLP government hasn't got a clue what they are doing with tourism. Their CLP plan contains vague references to growing tourism, but all they've done is pass laws to lock up 10-year-olds and attempt to give an unelected bureaucrat the ability to fast-track unknown and unfunded projects which could negatively impact the environment, our tourism industry, which relies on to get visitors to the Territory. Speaking of tourism, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Territory is home to a beautiful natural and largely untouched parks and reserves, which are our biggest draw card for visitors and locals alike. It'd be hard to imagine the Territory without the wonderful and the wonder and the beauty of our parks and reserves. These valuable assets need to be managed in a way which opens them up to the public access, but also protects their biodiversity, natural features and their spiritual, cultural significance and sacred values. That's why the Territory Labor Government introduced the NT Parks Master Plan in 2023. This crafted an important strategic framework that establishes and prioritises over the very long term how our parks and reserves will be cared for, developed and protected. This is a plan which balances the need to deliver new tourism infrastructure, support Aboriginal economic development and our outdoor lifestyle, whilst also protecting the environment and biodiversity of our parks. Another key component to protecting our wonderful environment are our Aboriginal Ranger groups, who are crucial in the frontline service right across the Territory. The former Labor government delivered the highly successful Aboriginal Ranger Grant Program, which over the past 7 years delivered $10 million of capital grants to 46 Ranger groups and Aboriginal land management organisations, and almost $11 million to 31 groups to fund land and sea management projects. Mr Deputy Speaker, parks and reserves are valued. They are not only a key part of our lifestyle, but are our biggest tourist attractions. Showcasing the best of the NT and offering relevant services and activities to visitors, providing places and offerings for tourism and private development, and ensuring all decisions are managed in a culturally respectful way with traditional owners, consent and approval. Another very important aspect of our parks environment, which we should highlight today, is the effect of gamba grass. I'd also like to acknowledge the Greens member, the member for Nightcliff, for bringing a motion forward today on the petition for the next general business day around eradicating gamba grass in Litchfield National Park. I think it's a very important piece that we'll be debating, and as Territory Labor, we will fully support that motion coming forward to the House, because we do recognise that gamba grass is a very invasive species and that it is encroaching and is already in the Litchfield National Park. So thank you for the member for Nightcliff for bringing that important motion forward. Mr Deputy Speaker, gamba grass is an invasive species which threatens to run over our Territory parks, particularly in my electorate, the Litchfield National Park, endangering not only its wonderful tourism opportunities but also its biodiversity. It is an issue at the forefront of the mind of industries, community groups and residents alike. That is why the former Labor government took the steps over our years in government to invest in the Gamba Army and the overarching Gamba Management Plan. Territory Labor know that more action is needed and that this can be done through a sustained, coordinated and appropriate funded target approach to mitigate and eradicate the gamba grass. Territory Labor is calling on the CLP government to honour the funding commitments in the 2024 Territory budget, which will help ensure that the hard work goes against this invasive species, and it continues that the Territory does not face the risk of an environmental collapse on our beloved parks. Mr Deputy Speaker, the former Labor government delivered a modern environmental protection system for the Territory. In 2019, our government passed the Environmental Protection Bill, which helped create a contemporary environmental protection regime. The Environmental Protection Act 2019 supports responsible oversight of development to protect the Territory's waterways, landforms, marine environments and biodiversity and irreversible harm. Development and growth that brings benefits to everyone now and into the future without compromising the places that are special to Territorians. Better decision making for the Territory where industry knows the rules and the public gets to have their say on how the Territory is developed. The new and improved environmental impact assessment system replaces the outdated and ineffective system which was introduced in 1984. The former Territory Labor government understood it was outdated, inefficient and ineffective to deliver the environmental protections that are expected now. Mr Deputy Speaker, the CLP is pushing for a Territory Coordinator who is focused on economic development, which is important, yes, but this individual has the ability to discard our social and cultural well-being with a healthy and productive environment. This type of thinking does not support sustainable development in the long term. It reverts to the thinking that environmental protection is in opposition of our economic development. This is not the case, Mr Deputy Speaker. Environmental protection is integral to it. This is why the Territory Labor government passed this contemporary piece of environmental legislation. It is an important piece of legislation for industry and proponents because it puts in place an environmental impact assessment and approval process which is clear in its requirements, streamlined and efficient, resulting in greater certainty. Mr Deputy Speaker, in wrapping up, Madam Speaker, in wrapping up, again, I'd just like to thank the member for Gwadja for bringing this forward today, and I look forward to hearing from other members. Thank you.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I thank the member for Gwadja for bringing this important motion to the House, Madam Speaker. We know that Territorians love the environment and we know that they seek to ensure that there are strong protections when it comes to the Northern Territory environment. I know from my own electorate of Arnhem that we have some pristine landscapes that we want to continue to protect. And there has been some really great stories of development and tourism on country driven by traditional owners in my electorate, Madam Speaker, like the beautiful Nitmiluk National Park, formerly known as Catherine Gorge. Other people may be familiar with the old historic name, but Nitmiluk National Park is over 30 years of joint venture sharing between the Northern Territory Government and the Jawoyn people, sharing that beautiful part of the Northern Territory and having those protections because it is a national park. And also I've got Elsie National Park, Madam Speaker, which is home to the beautiful Bitter Springs thermal pools and the Mataranka thermal pools off the aquifer there, and that water is very special. As we know, Madam Speaker, it is crystal clear. It's also been used in lots of Northern Territory tourism promotions, and I feel very honoured and privileged to be able to represent that part of the Territory, not just for the locals, of course, as the local member, but also all the visitors that spend time and money and effort coming to the Territory and enjoying the Territory. And that's one of the parts of the Territory, Madam Speaker, that during the COVID days, when we had only the internal travel available to Territorians, I was very surprised that lots of people who came down to spend their tourism vouchers at the time, which our former Labor government introduced to get people travelling intra-territory and enjoying the beautiful Northern Territory and the landscape and places that they may not have otherwise visited. Lots of people from Darwin, Madam Speaker, hadn't gone past to Catherine. They hadn't gone to Mataranka. So I was very surprised. I saw lots of people, which was great, in Catherine, either on their way down to Mataranka to spend their tourism voucher or on the way back from Mataranka. You know, you sort of take it for granted when you've been doing it your whole life, but particularly for me in the last 8 years, a lot of travel and a lot of kilometres in that beautiful environment. So I do feel very privileged to be able to speak to the motion today, but particularly when we're talking about the protections of the environment and the importance of water security as well, which is very intrinsically linked. Madam Speaker, ensuring that future generations get the benefit of a healthy environment to those that came before them and those who will come after is a moral obligation that all of us in this place play a role with. Madam Speaker, from our beautiful parks and reserves to our red desert sands to the glorious ranges in Central Australia, your home, to also the beautiful rainforests, wetlands and tropical seas and waterways in the north, and particularly places that I represent in the Arnhem Electorate. Our environment is the envy of the world, and for a very good reason, Madam Speaker. And we do love this place as Territorians. We want to share and continue to protect this beautiful place that we love. So when we talk about community expectations, we can be certain that Territorians want to see our environment properly protected. On any development, we want to ensure that there is robust regulatory framework assessments, that the merits of this are assessed properly, independently, and not for personal gain, and to ensure the impact is in a positive way for the Territory and for the environment. Madam Speaker, in no ways does the Labor opposition want to look at blocking development or stalling projects, but we do want to ensure that any work or development proposals, we look at the mitigation of harm to ecosystems, biodiversity or natural resources in the process, and those protections are always very important. We want to ensure development avoids and minimises any irreversible environmental harm that could come from that change, from that development, those processes. And we want to always ensure that we protect endangered species, our special ecosystems in the Territory, and in particular those critical habitats. Madam Speaker, there are uncontroversial things. These are uncontroversial things to do that you would expect of a Northern Territory Parliament. I know that many developers and other industry groups who support this happening do not want to proceed in projects that would irreversibly harm and cause danger to our environment. This is why we firmly believe, Madam Speaker, that the CLP's Territory Coordinator proposal raises a lot of questions. We've heard from the other members in the chamber today who've made their contributions already. And what I will say, Madam Speaker, is that I'll give the member for Nelson a bit of credit. He's the Deputy Chief Minister of the CLP government. At least he had the subconscious out loud when he said the point of the Territory Coordinator is to cut corners. And I know he may say that he misspoke and he bumbled that one, and I'm sure we've all seen the video of the Chief Minister and the Deputy Chief Minister in hysterics laughing at this constant slip of the tongue. He couldn't get it right first, second, third, fourth. I lost count, to be honest, Madam Speaker. But, Member for Nelson, I do commend you on having the courage to tell the truth about what the CLP government's subconscious intentions are to cut corners and look at sidestepping important processes that Territorians believe should stay in place. Madam Speaker, the Chief Minister's proposal to grant herself additional powers to override her minister's decisions and undertake statutory processes is alarming. This move raises concerns about the erosion of the democratic principles and concentration of power that a Chief Minister and the government should hold. By taking a page out of former Liberal Prime Minister Scott Morrison's playbook, Chief Minister Finocchiaro is, in effect, threatening to bulldoze her very own CLP team's decision-making if they dare to follow this established process of legislation to reach conclusions which she disagrees with as Chief Minister. This begs the question, Madam Speaker, does the Chief Minister lack faith in her team's ability to make the best decisions on behalf of Territorians? If so, why does she appoint them in the first place? Maybe something about how it tells voters that she doubts that their judgment should stay in place if she believes that something should be better, not about the legal responsibilities that they swear as ministers of the Crown. So we are very concerned, as we've said in the past, Madam Speaker, and I'll put in the record, that the voices of Territorians is not being heard by the CLP government when they are talking about this particular proposal of the Territory Coordinator. Again, we place on the record that we do not disagree with fast-tracking processes, but we want processes to be in place, Madam Speaker. It's very clear, and I make that very clear on the record today. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, the Chief Minister seeks power to exclude or modify laws based on the Territory Coordinator's advice. Territorians are indeed correct to worry that if this provision is used, that it'll silence dissenting voices and hide unpopular decisions from scrutiny. This coming from the CLP government, who promised to be transparent, open and accountable with their decision making. Looking a bit dark-limb and unclear right now, Madam Speaker. The government's responsibility is not only to consult properly on decisions that affect Territorians and the things that we love, like the environment, but it is to make sure that we do not take for granted the processes of an election win, to ensure that consulting with Territorians is ultimately what the government of the day should always do. Madam Speaker, the CLP's attempts to weaken environmental safeguards and limit feedback mechanisms is indeed deeply troubling. We must also consider the dangers proposed by somebody like Peter Dutton, the opposition leader federally, and his openly support of nuclear ambitions. So, Madam Speaker, I'll pick up on the interjection. The CLP member for Blaine, hoping obviously for his team that Peter Dutton becomes the next Prime Minister. But I'd be really interested to see what the member for Blaine and his electorate and places that he grew up, like we grew up together in Batchelor, like Batchelor and Litchfield National Park, what do they have to say about Litchfield National Park and nuclear ambitions from the possibly new Prime Minister, if it is Peter Dutton? I'd be very interested to hear that on the record, Madam Speaker. But setting aside any of the concerns that we already have, Madam Speaker, about environmental, health and economic concerns, it is very clear that the federal Liberal opposition view the Territory as a convenient dumping ground for nuclear waste. This is a shame, and regardless of your side of politics, again, Madam Speaker, we must make sure the Territory does not become Australia's dumping ground when it comes to nuclear waste. The CLP's willingness to appease their federal counterparts is quite concerning on a social and an economic level, Madam Speaker. The combination of the CLP Chief Minister seeking to silence Territorians and the federal Liberal opposition, who would be eager to dump nuclear waste should they become the federal government in the Territory, is a very frightening prospect for us all, Madam Speaker. We've seen previous cases in history here in the Northern Territory where traditional owners, where station pastoralists have fought long and hard against decisions around removing the rights of the Territorians to make decisions around land, country and property in the Territory. Some very significant and landmark cases in the Territory. I'm sure people will know which ones they are, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when Labor was in government in 2016, we knew that Territorians had lost faith in the then CLP government over their inability to put the interests of Territorians ahead of their own vested interests. This is why we introduced, at the time, Madam Speaker, and we passed, the Environmental Protection Bill in 2019 to help restore faith in decision-making by the Northern Territory government when it came to the environment. And we hear environmental groups saying that the environmental laws in the Northern Territory are not strong enough. We acknowledge that, but all the steps that we take to better the interests of Territorians, particularly around the protections of the environment, need to continue on a solid platform, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we felt when we were in government as the Labor NT government that it was important to ensure that those environmental protection systems did support the following: responsible oversight of development to protect the Territory's waterways, landforms, marine environments, biodiversity from irreversible harm. The development and growth that brings benefits to everyone now and into the future without compromising the places that are special and loved by Territorians. Better decision making for the Territory, where industry knows the rules and the public gets to have their say on how the Territory is to be developed. And then there is a fulsome process to follow onwards from that. Madam Speaker, the assessment system that our former Labor government replaced was introduced in 1984, dare I say, the year before I was born, and had not been substantially amended since that time, Madam Speaker. It was outdated, it was ambiguous, it was inefficient, ineffective when we're looking at the delivery of environmental protections in a contemporary manner that Territorians expected and that they definitely deserved. This was a huge step forward for the Territory, Madam Speaker. And it seems crazy to say today that when returned to government, the CLP has axed the Office of Climate Change. Don't they learn from their mistakes, Madam Speaker? This was in their DNA before in 2012 to 2016. They haven't learnt from this. They've done it again. Climate change, Madam Speaker, is one of the most significant and defining issues facing the Territory, facing Australia, and facing the globe, Madam Speaker. And here we are with a government who wants to wash their hands of any responsibility or discussion by axing that very important government office to focus on climate change. Madam Speaker, after years of inaction and denial by the CLP when they were in government, our former Labor government restored funding to environmental groups and restored the Office of Climate Change. We released the Northern Territory Climate Change Response towards 2050. And if those opposite have not read that document, I would implore them to do so. Madam Speaker, we know that if we do not act on climate change, we will further see impacts in a negative way on water security, on our personal health and well-being, on major infrastructure across the Territory, on the thriving of key industries, jobs, and also the flourishing of our natural ecosystems. Madam Speaker, we know that the transition to a low-carbon economy underpinned by technology will not only get us to a net zero emissions future, but will also create new jobs in the Territory for the future, new industries in the future, whilst maintaining the Northern Territory's competitiveness. Madam Speaker, at the time, the response to the paper said, climate change impacts are already being experienced across the Territory. Over the last century, annual average temperatures across the Territory have increased by 0.5 degrees Celsius in the west and 2.2 degrees Celsius in the southeast. There has been significant increase in the number of extremely hot days in both the top end and Central Australia. Climate modelling indicates that these trends will continue. Madam Speaker, I'm sure that everyone in this chamber has seen over the last few years the change and the impact of climate change in the Territory, and especially when I go out to my electorate, Madam Speaker, and speak to, in particular, rangers, Aboriginal ranger groups and the wildlife rangers that work for parks. When we talk about the change in the seasons, there's been significant anecdotal, and I know a lot of research as well, there's been significant sharing of what people have seen when they were growing up, to when they were teenagers, to young adults, to now either in their midlife years or in their elder years. And I hear this as a concern that, particularly when it comes to animal species and plant species, and especially when it's bush species, bush food, bush medicine, etc., that people significantly notice that there is a decrease, and they're very concerned about the impact of the environment just purely because of climate change and what will be left for their kids and their grandkids or their great-grandkids going onwards. So it is everyone's business, Madam Speaker, to be concerned about climate change. Madam Speaker, we know that the CLP has not shared any vision whatsoever or a desire, have not put on the record of what they would do to address climate change. I know they've been in for 13 weeks, but they've been very quiet on this very important issue to Territorians, and it would be a great opportunity for the government to explain what they intend to do in this space. Because quite frankly, what I'm hearing from my electorate and other parts of the Territory is that it's not good enough, and Territorians will not accept this from their new government. We want to ensure that we provide a fulsome overview of any legislation, policies, regulation that we have the oversight for in this place, ultimately provided by the government, but we still need to provide that information out to our electorates, particularly when it comes to the strategic plan of water security. We know water is vital for our well-being, Madam Speaker. Everyone knows that. Doesn't matter what part of the Territory we are, we know how important water is. So the functioning of our communities and our key industries also need to know certainty around water. What will be the impact and demand of water? What will be the usage of water? What will be the protection of water? Madam Speaker, some of the work that we did in that plan as the former Labor government was to focus on new safe drinking water legislation, securing Darwin's future water supply, improving water security for our remote communities, and improving water outcomes for homelands on country. We've already done all the work, Madam Speaker. The new government can continue that on. It can be a Territory legacy, not necessarily just a Labor legacy. Madam Speaker, the plan that we had worked on was already, the plan that we worked on already delivered a $28 million remote water security and quality program, which was targeted with high priority water security and water quality issues. The work included new bores, network upgrades, improved water disinfection systems, and the installation of meters to monitor and reduce water usage. It also included working with the Commonwealth Government and the Land Council, the Aboriginal Land Councils, to deliver more housing in our remote communities through that remote housing program, to ultimately reduce overcrowding in our remote communities by the investment of $139 million of essential service infrastructure and upgrades to support the remote housing investment program. Over the next 4 years, this will be a big task that the new government can continue on, but it will create a long-lasting Territory legacy, and water infrastructure and the protection of the environment is an important part of that. And Madam Speaker, we appointed a new Water Controller of Water Resources. The role is now an independent statutory decision maker that is separate from the Department of Environment, Parks and Water Security. The controller has wide-ranging powers under the Water Act, including granting licences and permits, approving actions and enforcing compliance around water usage. This provides institutional...
Please take your seat, Leader of the Opposition. Member for Arafura.
Standing Order 43, request an extension of time.
Is an extension of time granted to the member?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Member for Arafura, and thank you, Madam Speaker, and the Chamber. Madam Speaker, this provides institutional separation between water resourcing, the allocation and management, as well as the regulatory enforcement in accordance with the National Water Initiative. Madam Speaker, the Territory Labor opposition is also calling on the CLP government to amend the Water Act. The current Act has served the Territory well, but in this term, amendments should be made to the following: support and enhance sustainable development and promote the value of water and its management now and into the future. A framework for allocation decisions that sets in legislation and protections of the environmental and cultural values, taking into account the risks and impacts of climate change. Strong transparency measures and mechanisms to engage with the community and to ensure that Aboriginal Territorians have a genuine and meaningful voice in the processes. The commitment to renewal of the National Water Initiative and other key national water policy reforms. Madam Speaker, even in the last term of our Labor government, we introduced reforms in regards to the management of environmental impacts of mining, such as passing amendments to the Environment Protection Act 2019 to transfer responsibility of environment regulation of mining activities to the Minister for Environment, Climate Change and Water Security and the Department, and to establish a risk-based, outcomes-focused environmental licensing regime for all mining activities in the Northern Territory. Transferring mining officers from the Department of Industry, Tourism and Trade to the department to regulate the environmental impacts of mining under the new regime, and developing and consulting on risk criteria and standard conditions for mining licensing. Madam Speaker, our former Labor government also progressed work on key deliverables under the NT's circular economy strategy, including expanding and simplifying the Territory's successful container deposit scheme by establishing ministerial recycling rate targets, undertaking analysis and consultation to inform a ban on problematic single-use plastics, facilitating investment in waste management, resource recovery and recycling infrastructure across the Territory, including through the National Partnership Agreement. Madam Speaker, in that time, we were very proud to work on current initiatives and new initiatives and continue to see what else we could do in government that Territorians had brought forward, that key environmental groups had brought forward, as well as industry groups in the mining and gas sector as well, Madam Speaker. Some of the important work across the Territory, particularly around preserving the environment and the natural landscape, I have to mention Rangers, Madam Speaker, and the work that they do across the Territory. Our Northern Territory Rangers, whether they're our Aboriginal Rangers, whether they're our Parks and Wildlife Rangers, make a significant contribution to the region's environmental, social and economic wellbeing. Our rangers are dedicated and work hard out on country, and often now in the very, very hot weather or sometimes very wet weather, and they are essential to, Madam Speaker, protecting and conserving the Northern Territory's unique and diverse natural resources, including flora, fauna and ecosystems. They are essential to managing wildlife populations, monitoring species and implement conservation programs to protect endangered species. They are instrumental in maintaining and managing protected areas such as national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, coastal reserves and marine protected areas, as well as Indigenous protected areas, Madam Speaker. They also work on implementing fire management strategies to prevent and mitigate the impact of wildfires on the environment. And, Madam Speaker, they also monitor and control invasive species such as weeds and feral animals to protect native ecosystems. And often they're involved in research projects, collecting that important data and statistics, which we can use for whatever we want to use for, apparently. But they do collect this important data and statistics around the environment, the ecosystems, so we can see points of time. We can see over days, weeks, months and years, Madam Speaker. What are the changes in the season? What are the changes to the species? What are the changes to the plant and wildlife that we see across the different environments and ecosystems of the Northern Territory? Some of the work, and I'll just share with the House, Madam Speaker, that ranger groups in my electorate of Arnhem do pretty cool, a contract to collect space junk from the Equatorial Launch Australia rocket launches in North East Arnhem in the member for Mulca's electorate. Some of that really amazing space work, the space junk's got to go somewhere, unfortunately, when it falls down. And a group of rangers in my electorate, the Meemore Rangers, are contracted by NASA from America to track and to find space junk that falls from the launching pads, from those important scientific research rocket launches in the Arnhem electorate, in the Indigenous protected areas. So that sort of work is so important when we talk about looking after country, but learning about the new technologies across the Northern Territory and how we can continue to preserve country. The other group I'd like to mention, there's amazing groups, but there's two on the coast that I particularly want to mention, and that is the Numburini Rangers and the Anandiliakwa Rangers. Numburini Rangers from Numbwa and Anandiliakwa Rangers from Groote Eylandt. And the Groote Eylandt Rangers, Anandiliakwa Rangers, have already had a partnership with Sea Shepherd, an international environmental group around protection of our coastal and marine beautiful country, sea country. And Sea Shepherd was at Groote Eylandt last year, and I think this year as well. I'll have to get the dates, Madam Speaker, but collecting kilos and kilos and kilos of ghost nets, old abandoned fishing nets that drift out into the ocean, collect up, and cause great danger to our marine species and our marine plant life. The Numburini Rangers, very excitingly, next year, Madam Speaker, will also partner with Sea Shepherd in that southeast Arnhem, Gulf of Carpentaria, my mother's country, that area. So they will also provide an opportunity to learn and to share and to teach Sea Shepherd and vice versa about the work that they do on country, particularly around ghost nets. And I know the member for Mulca also has ranger groups in his electorate that we cross over, the boundaries that cross over between Mulca and Arnhem. And protecting sea country is so important because 80% of the Territory's coastline, Madam Speaker, is protected Aboriginal Sea country. Madam Speaker, I want to acknowledge the work that our rangers do and also our public servants across the Northern Territory in supporting cultural and traditional practices and promoting joint management of land and sea country. The work that they do to educate visitors from within the Territory, from within Australia, or our international visitors about the importance of the connection of local communities to our plant and wildlife, and the importance of the conservation, sustainability and environmental protections is invaluable. We thank you for that work. Madam Speaker, especially the guidance that our rangers provide to tourists, to locals as well, in supporting responsible recreation and tourism practices, particularly on country. Our rangers play a vital role in maintaining the health, resilience, productivity of the Northern Territory's natural and cultural resources, and it deserves to be protected, and their work deserves to also be supported. Madam Speaker, the commitment to protect the environment has never wavered by our Territory Labor team, and we are calling on the CLP government to at least consider the environment in the decisions that they make over the next 4 years. We would prefer this as opposed to an attack and attempt to silence people in the Territory who care about the environment, who look after the environment and would like to see more protections of the environment in the Northern Territory. We will continue to work and listen and learn from Territorians on our side. We would love the CLP government to do the same to ensure that we can keep our Territory environment pristine and great shape. I would like to place on the record again, Madam Speaker, my thanks to the member for Goyja for bringing forward this very important debate, because we cannot have a future in the Territory if we do not protect and look after our environment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.